Hello, it's Brad Laurie, your Blockchain Brad, and today I'm honoured to speak with none other than John Conley. He is the Chief Economist of Geeq, and he's here to explain all things about the team, what they're doing, and specifically about their technology. John, thank you very much for your time today.
Pleasure to be here.
Likewise, mate. Now, your slogan on your in your literature and on your website explains that you are aiming to embrace blockchain with confidence. That's a bold statement. But can you tell us about the developments you're making and the innovations you're making to blockchain to essentially have that kind of confidence?
Sure. So my background is in game theory and mathematical economics. And so my career is being built on designing mechanisms, trying to implement solutions, trying to construct proofs that deal with every possible case, to show that something is not just probably true, but it absolutely is true, at least under the assumptions that you make. And what I saw in blockchain was that there are a lot of really optimistic assumptions in the security models. And I couldn't, sort of scandalized, honestly. I couldn't see how a lot of those would be satisfied. Mm-hmm. And then thinking about it more, not only will they not be satisfied, there are also ways to game it. They're not really constructed to keep out people that are playing outside of the rules. And so I like puzzles, and so that's what I set myself out to do, to design a mechanism that generated the security that you wanted, defining what the security is that you wanted, and then actually achieved it, and right. Regardless of how bad people were behaving.
And it's good to know that you've been building on previous and pre-existing technologies. Also, you've explored clearly the merits of some of them, but also some of the flaws. And we'll look at that later when we expand on those consensus mechanisms and the schools of thought that represent them. But moving back to Geeq for a moment, in a nutshell, how would you explain what Geeq is about, what you're trying to do, especially with statements like this, for example, that says you're an ecosystem of interoperable, customizable blockchains with real use case?
Wow. Okay. So that sort of started in the middle, actually, but I'm happy to do it. Mm-hmm. The starting point is really, I think, the proof of honesty protocol, and that's what gives us our security levels. But the interoperability sort of comes along with the other design elements that we're trying to achieve. Scalability, for example, is a thing that is difficult for many blockchains. And it's really a fundamental limitation. If you put everything on one blockchain, the best you can do is the strength of the node and the strength of the internet connection that they share. There's no more data that can pass across that than the bandwidth that's available. So if you've got a master chain, or you've got some sort of just even a single chain, then there's just a limit to what you can scale. The only way you can break that limit is by going on to Amazon Web Services and just provisioning as big a virtual machine as you want. But then, of course, that's censorable, and that's not decentralized in any way. So the solution has to be to have multiple chains. You've got to have multiple chains, and if you want to keep the cost of those chains low, you have to make sure the resources that are fundamentally consumed are also low. And that means that you can't have validation networks that are tens of thousands of people. If you're paying tens of thousands of computers to work, that's a fundamental cost that the system has to cover. Mm-hmm. So the beginning of our design approach is to say we have multiple chains. Each of those chains has a fairly limited number of nodes. Each of those chains might be able to handle, we're right now actually doing the tech build. And in our initial builds, we're getting a couple hundred transactions per second per chain. We're very early. It's going to go up from that. But if you have chains that can interoperate, you can have any number of them. So you can have any number of transactions per second. And so that's what we do.
So you're really moving towards this idea of networks of chains, or building on the idea and premise of one blockchain, and really expanding that for people to, I guess, maximize the potential of this for themselves and for business. But moving on, some of the other core assets that you bring, or the core features, one of them is that you are a blockchain infrastructure as a service. So in that context, discussing the magnitude of your project or your startup, and the fact that you want to build this out, to be a very robust system, how important is it to lead the idea of being a service?
How important is it to be a service? Well, because we have this idea of a multi-chain environment, thought would be to have a particular kind of service or a particular DApp exist on one chain only. So if you have, for example, an IoT chain, and that IoT chain might want to be recording telemetry from fire alarms or medical devices or transformers to make sure they're not overheating or sparking, you might have hundreds of pieces of telemetry coming in every second that you record to demonstrate that you either have or have not done what you're supposed to do. Well, that's a pretty simple application, but it's very high volume. Each one of those pieces of telemetry is not very valuable, except the one that really is, that shows that, no, your transformer didn't spark and cause the wildfire. That one you want, but the rest, it's not so valuable. So we have one chain that does that. All the nodes are dedicated simply to processing those transactions. There's no crowding from other kinds of apps that might want to take away processing power or ledger space. And so the blockchain as a service notion then would be, you have an idea, we build it on a chain. That chain is dedicated to your services, although it interops in a bigger area. And then there's another chain that does something else, and you have nothing to do with it except occasionally you might transfer tokens across.
Okay, so obviously the fact that you are trying to provide a service must also extend towards enterprise and be focused on the possibility of business. Can you talk to us about that point of value as well?
As everybody knows, Ethereum can handle what, 15 perhaps transactions per second. Lightning networks we don't have to talk about yet.
No.
Bitcoin can do maybe 5, 7, something like that. That's actually a fair number of transactions, and they don't usually hit the maximum. But that's never going to be anything like what enterprises need, and it's also very expensive. So our idea is that we want to create the possibility of creating enormous amounts of transactions for very, very little money. So our transactions cost is about 1/100 of a cent. And the way that we're approaching it is that we're going to build the fundamental platform, but we're also going to build sort of solutions to begin with, like just low-hanging fruit. So micropayments, for example, or telemetry chains, possibly chain of custody sorts of things, really elementary applications that might call for a lot of data, and people would, take opioids. How many prescriptions are there? Billions. And how many pills go across? Billions. So you can't pay a nickel to record every pill that goes across the chain, but you can pay 1/100 of a cent, and then you have a record, and then you have accountability. So our plan then is to come out of the box with solutions that are cheap and actually don't have to hit the core of your business. They hit the edge. So you can adopt the solution, and it just does something that you've never been able to do before. Right. You don't have to overturn your data system and say, oh, that's great, let's just be on blockchain.
Sure, and perhaps that's one of the key innovations in itself, is that it does sit on the periphery of the businesses out there, right. and it means that they can seamlessly interact with the technology and obviously reap the benefits of that. And we'll discuss some of those benefits, such as cost savings and beyond, later. But one of the things that I did want to discuss a little bit more is the security itself. It's a big buzzword in all of your white paper and all of your literature. You're claiming that you have not only limitless blockchains, but that you have unsurpassed security. So can you talk to us about the value of security and how you focused on that to build this? Sure.
So I started this with a guy named Rick Aselstein, who's been in IoT space in the Toronto-Waterloo corridor for a long time. And he called me up because he read a paper that I'd written about this in 2017. And he said, let's work on a project for IoT. I said, great, we did that. We started anyway. And then I realized I couldn't build it on Ethereum because it wasn't secure and it cost too much. And the Solidity was very difficult to work with. And so I just said, well, can we do better? And then one thing led to another, and then we had this protocol. The approach that we've taken is this. So I guess there's a number of key elements. How do you measure security? Well, one of the standard measures in blockchain is something called Byzantine fault tolerance. And the idea is that if you have a certain percentage of the nodes that are recording the data into the chain behaving honestly, then the chain is secure, because maybe the majority is honest, and then you take the majority vote and everything's good. With proof of work, it's the amount of hashing power that's devoted. And whoever has the majority of hashing power has an ability to make the longest chain, and then that's canonical, and that perhaps is secure. So the best you can do, and these are theorems, these are actually limits of possibility. With proof of stake, 33% is the limit of your Byzantine fault tolerance. Proof of work, it's 50%. Proof of authority, probably 50%, or 1/3, depending on how you frame it. But that's, to me, not very good. With Bitcoin, which I love, by the way, I think Bitcoin it does exactly what it does extremely well. But if you were to start putting something like the stock exchange on Ethereum or on a proof of work chain, now suddenly you've got trillions of dollars of value. And even if you couldn't just steal those tokenized stocks, you could crash the stock market. And the NSA tomorrow could turn on enough computers to overwhelm the Bitcoin and the Ethereum.
And that's a very serious issue, considering that there can be some sort of top-down effect, should they so wish. Yes, and clearly, that's one thing you want to address with your consensus mechanism.
Right. So I think the one reason that Bitcoin is kind of awesome is that what it contains is not the cost of attacking it is kind of commensurate with what it contains. It contains several $1 billion worth of crypto tokens. It would cost much less than that to attack it, but still it's somewhere in proportion. But if you try to do things on proof of stake or proof of, or even Ethereum, it might cost $100,000, $1 million an hour to run enough Amazon Web Services to have a majority on Ethereum.
Yes, and it certainly raises the eyebrow because of that issue with proof of stake specifically. And when it comes to distribution, I did want to ask you this, John, in the context of discussing, proof of work, proof of stake, and then also your innovation with proof of honesty. What about distribution within itself? The beauty of that model, how do you retain the value of decentralization as well, especially in the context of Byzantine approaches, because often there's this discussion about, how decentralized are they? How distributed are they?
And the answer is not very in many cases. I think, I'm not going to name projects, but there are certain projects that have the majority of the tokens still held by the founders or by core groups. And if they have more than 50% or more than 66%, actually a third can shut the thing down. Then the ledger says whatever they say the ledger says, and it would be worth purchasing those tokens if it was an economic attack. North Korea, Russia, China, whoever. If something lived on a chain and I could buy $100 million worth of tokens and control the chain, that's a really cheap cyber attack, actually, in the scale of things.
And it's a scary thought that it's possible.
It's absolutely possible, I believe, and it hasn't happened, I think, because nothing of real value has really been placed on any public blockchain. Bitcoin has Bitcoin, but there really isn't any external value of significance that lives on any blockchain at this moment. As soon as it does, I think we're in trouble.
So you're bringing a solution to this, though, with the upscaling of security. Can you talk to us about the consensus mechanism you built in and how it affords, a much more secure system for people to interact with?
Sure. So I said that Byzantine fault tolerance was one measure. It's a flawed measure because it comes from the notion that machines either work or they don't work as intended. It's really a computer science notion. So it's not a notion of strategic players. It's a notion of, if you're not broken, you follow the rules. And if you are broken, you don't follow the rules. But people that don't follow the rules aren't broken. They're just doing what's best for them. So it's not the best model, but let's just take that as a first case. The way that proof of honesty works is the following. Any well-designed blockchain protocol, Ethereum, every single thing you can name, is deterministic in the sense that it's a state transition machine. If you have a state of the ledger and you have a set of correct transactions, there is only one final state of the ledger that's correct. And if that wasn't true, then it wouldn't be blockchain. So if you have access to the data, you can say this is correct, that you can verify it for yourself if you have the access. So that's what we leverage. We say that you as a user are able to choose which node you wish to interact with. So you say, you query a node and you say, prove to me your honesty. And that involves a series of Merkle proofs, and there's some technical computer science there. So you can prove that you actually have followed the rules, that things are signed correctly. And so I say, okay, I believe you, you're honest, and I've made the judgment from the edge that you're an honest node. I send you my transaction, and I'll skip over some of the details. But the ledgers, the nodes send it to a hub which rotates. The hub collects those transactions, signs them in a big bundle of candidate transactions, sends them back out to each of the nodes. And the key here is each individual node is making a judgment on its own about which transactions are correct or not, and what that should do to update the ledger. So it's done at the edge. There's not a block proposer. There's not somebody that says, here's the next block of correct transactions. Everybody decides the correct transactions themselves, but they decide over the same set of candidate blocks. And since the deterministic mechanism, there is only one possibility for which are correct and how that updates the ledger.
Right. Okay. So you've moved on from the way in which BTC and even Ethereum, as examples of proof of work and proof of stake, have done had that requisite of block producer. So now moving on, how's the feedback been from communities with regard to this innovation? When devs are interacting, for example, with this consensus mechanism, what are they saying?
Well, so let me not move on quite yet because I didn't get to the punchline.
Okay, sure.
The key here is the following: that now we're at the edge, and we have any number of nodes that might or might not be honest. But nodes can tell that the other guys are honest or not, because if they didn't do exactly what I did as an honest node, they had to be dishonest. If you didn't do what I did, one of us is honest, and it's not me, it's you. So there's a mechanism called catastrophic dissent that allows me to write audits against nodes that are dishonest. Now the question should be, how is it that one honest node can enforce an audit against 9 or 100 dishonest nodes? And the answer is, it's the user at the edge. So the user at the edge can find that one honest node and say, okay, I verify that you're honest, goes to another node, either he doesn't respond with the proof or it's a proof that shows that he's not honest. So if I can find an honest node, if there's one honest node in the system, I can send transactions to that node. Other users will only accept transactions on an honest ledger, because a dishonest ledger is a ledger where tokens are stolen and nobody's going to take them. They're invalid. It's a piece of fiction. And so all I actually need is a single honest node. And users can then find that honest node, and anybody else is honest, that's great too. And what that gives me is, we call it 99% Byzantine fault tolerance. Because
so a lot more secure.
Node is none. Right, and it doesn't matter if all of Russia and China use all of their computational power. We don't take votes over to liars. Only honest people matter, and they can be determined. So
yes, I did read that you don't have voting, which is a big deal as well. So you're not putting, a lot of that. Ironically, a lot of that trust. When we're talking about honesty, you're not putting a lot of that pressure on all of this, social sort of dynamic.
No, absolutely not. No.
Okay. Now,
I have opinions about that.
And with regard to the consensus mechanism itself, as I was asking before, what has the feedback been from those who are starting to sort of tinker with the tech? Are they finding that there's already clearly, evidence for greater value than the preceding iterations we've seen?
Well, so I think we haven't really burst into public view yet, unfortunately. So I've discussed this primarily in academic so I've discussed this in academic environments and in corporate environments. And in academic environments, it's a very interesting argument, because what it comes down to is there's a couple of fundamental impossibility theorems. One is the CAP theorem, one is called the FTP theorem, and then there's practical Byzantine fault tolerance. So these sort of the three fundamental results that you have in these distributed systems that make a difference in blockchain. And that's where the argument lies, and that's our argument to have. So we've addressed these issues by stepping sideways.
Right.
So you can't do that, so you do you do something else. So that argument, they say, oh, that's cool. Some agree, some don't agree, but it's a very hard thing to get away from these fundamental impossibility results that are your bread and butter. but no, I think we've had very positive reactions, and we just got back from a conference actually at MIT in the Media Lab, and they had a lot of very interesting discussions there and positive feedback.
Well, that's good to hear, because clearly you're at that stage where, you know, it's academic and you're moving forward into the business arena and to the public arena, more importantly. But in the context that we move back to security, you've certainly ticked the box there and made it very clear that you've iterated on security issues from the past. But when we talk about that trilemma issue, as you would know, that triad, can we talk a bit more about the imperative of scalability in the context of having good security?
Well, so the trilemma is a sore point with me.
I thought it might be, actually.
Yeah, so it was something that was proposed, I think, originally by Vitalik as an idea, and it's a sensible idea. You know, it seems right that you should have to trade these things off. There's an academic paper that purports to prove the trilemma, but it sets up a little graphic, which is a trilemma, and then it generates a little algebraic model that, in my opinion, has really nothing to do with blockchain at all. It's really just a contestable market in a calibrated algebraic context. And then voila, it's the trilemma is proven. So actually, the trilemma is not an impossibility theorem, it's a graphic. It really has no...
Well, let's move away from that for a moment and just focus on scalability, because one thing we know, John, is that we need scalability for your network and for your ecosystem. So what are you doing to ensure that sort of synchronized with the imperative of great security, you have got measures in place to make sure you can be scalable and continue to really upscale the potential of your technology?
So I guess I view it as building this in layers. The first thing you got to do is build one blockchain that is secure. And you have to have a protocol that says that not only are all of the participants in the system incentivized very strongly, and in fact our guarantee in the game theoretic sense, which is different from the Byzantine fault tolerance sense, is that honest behavior is the unique coalition-proof equilibrium. And that's very different from saying that honesty is a Nash equilibrium. There could be millions of Nash equilibriums, so that's no good. There could be good ones and bad ones. And Nash is no good either, because if two people collude, they can break the Nash equilibrium, since it's only proof against unilateral deviation. We know that there are collusions. We know that there are coalitions. So you must have unique implementation via coalition-proof equilibrium. So that's the foundation. Build something which is strongly Byzantine fault tolerant, has a strong game theoretic guarantee. There. Now what's next? What's next is we want to have scalability. So you can't put too many transactions on one network. That's just a fact. You know, that networks are limited because they have limited resources. So you've got to find a way to have as many networks as you want and have them interoperate. And our strategy is to have a division between a validation layer, which has Geeq tokens, and an application layer, which initially will have a version of the Solidity engine. And so the application layer follows these extremely strict protocol rules, and that facilitates in certain ways the ability to move Geeq tokens safely across chains. So we can do that. The application layer, Solidity, has some security issues, and we can create interoperability, but it's not probably as secure as the validation layer. So key is build something secure, make sure everybody follows those same security protocols, and then you can interoperate, and then build something on top of it that exploits the virtual machine that is on the
I see. So essentially, once you've mastered the security issue, then you can start to really play around with the potentials of scalability. Do you think that it's something that is continuous as well? The potential, the scope. In the context, once again, of scalability? Is it something that you just continually work on as you move forward?
So yes and no. It's scalable infinitely in the sense that you can just keep on creating Geeq chains as long as you don't get bored with the project. You can just do as many as you like. And once they exist, there's nothing that anybody can do, including us, to stop them. They have a life of their own. They exist. They can't be shut down. Central authority can't come and point a gun at my head and say, take that down. I can't by design. And if I designed it so that I could, then what's the point of the whole project?
Right.
So, but what we can't do is update the protocol. Because if I can update the protocol, then I can change the protocol. And if I can change the protocol, I can destroy the protocol. I can take it down, I can alter it, I can roll back transactions. So blockchain has to be unalterable, or else it's just whatever humans say it is. So that's the reason that I...
Sure. So in the sense of immutability, we know that it's, set in stone. But what I'm really talking about is, when we move across to the potential for speed, for example, like expedience of transactions, making this more seamless as you iterate, in time, to be a more robust system, obviously the scalability capacity has to improve as well. So without trying to affect the code itself, that the fundamental sort of the immutable sort of context. Right. How are you going to enable a more global ecosystem emerge where scalability and TPS, for example, is all developed?
Yeah, well, so I guess again the strategy would be that the protocol placed on better machines would do better, because the protocol is not really the limitation. The protocol is designed to be as really efficient in terms of storage and message traffic. So we've designed it to be as minimal as it's really, well, probably not as minimal as possible, but extremely minimal. So it's coming close to the limits of how minimal it can be and still execute what it has to execute. But if you have a machine that has a gigabyte connection, well, you can do tens of thousands of transactions per second on a single chain. If you have a processor that can do millions of encryptions a second, same thing. So if you go to better networks and better technologies, yes, even a single chain will improve in its TPS. But really, our thought is that, honestly, at least as I can foresee, 100 TPS is a heck of a lot of TPS. Ethereum does 15, maybe on a good day. So first question is, how are you going to find the demand for 100 TPS on a single chain? First of all, you got to get the use case out there and make it cheap and make it something that people can integrate. So 100 TPS already is a lot. But then... And
is that what you have currently?
We have about 200 TPS currently on sort of home networks, that on laptops and home networks. That's what you can do. But we can have as many of those as we want. So if you want a zillion, we just have to divide a zillion by 200, and then you can... I
think, John, you make a really good point in the sense that TPS is not the end all, really the use case. Growing the ecosystem is probably the most important part in having real users. So let's explore this with regard to the layers once again. I just want to touch on that a bit more. You have this multi-layer or multi-chain design. Can you just address the specifics of each of the layers and why you built it this way in this full stack?
Sure. So first thing is we built a multi-chain because it's the only way you can get true scalability. If you put everything on a single chain, then what you're really counting on is that you have enough bandwidth or computational power to scale up as much as you need. And there are just simply limits. You have to shard in some way. So multi-chain is one way of sharding. There are other ways of sharding. But you have to go that direction. You must go that direction. The second part, I guess, is that sharding is no good, or having multi-chains is no good if these are all independent, because if you can't interoperate, then it's everybody's isolated.
Yeah, there's no network. You just have silos.
That's no good. Right. So you have to find a way to get multi-chain or have interoperability. So that was the second level. And the way that we were able to achieve that is by keeping this validation layer extremely simple. It doesn't contain any smart contracts. It doesn't contain, messages that you can write arbitrarily. It doesn't have complicated applications or special transactions or ERC20 nothing like that. All it has is Geeq transactions and a few other things that are network maintenance issues. So transfers of Geeq tokens and fee payments to validators. It's all that live on that layer. So it's really secure. It has that 99% Byzantine fault tolerance. It's got that game theoretic guarantee as well. So if we have that much guarantee, then we can have trust. Not trust, but we can have confidence, I guess, between the chains. There's more to it than that.
And I appreciate that detail, because I know we've talked a lot about the tech, but obviously without knowing that you have this strong foundation and this plan technologically, there's really no point discussing further in terms of use case and actualizing what you've done. And you've made it clear that you've really extended on pre-existing plans and ideas, and you've built your own system right down to new consensus mechanisms. Now, one of the big problems, obviously, you've addressed is security. Now it's time to talk about some of the key features that you've built into your system. You mentioned things like micropayments, machine-to-machine markets as well, but there's others, things like streaming, and then there's IoT, telemetry as well. So can you tell us a bit about those fundamental features that you've built in so that you can really utilize the benefits of blockchain in the real world?
So actually the key is we haven't built them in.
Okay.
We built a layer upon which you can build them. So we're going to build some things, but we actually want people to build things too, because we're not the smartest guys. The people have use cases we've never thought of. And the reason we're trying to come out of the box with things that can be used at the edge by enterprises is that network externalities are really important. So if we can get uses, if we can have adoption, then dApp builders can have confidence that they can come and do their own thing. And that's the objective, to have many people building. But why build on something that nobody's built on? So we have to push it over the edge. And that's why we're starting off with these use cases. Okay. So let's take an example. Pardon, go ahead.
I was just going to say, so the value prop really is that you're the toolbox for many of the, the future users and the future businesses that could onboard and benefit from what you have to offer as a protocol.
That's the hope, at least, yeah. So let's take some just examples of use cases. So micropayments. Everybody wants micropayments. It's the promise of blockchain, but it's very hard to do a micropayment because and if it costs you 5 cents on Ethereum to do a transaction, well, that already is too much for a micropayment. Mm-hmm. You can't really do it on a Lightning network because you've got to have a transaction on the Ethereum chain to lock up the tokens in your escrow, and then you've got to find a route to pay whoever it is you want to pay. You've got to have common escrows through links. It's going to probably be centralized, and it is going to be expensive. So that approach doesn't seem to work. You've got to make it possible to transfer 1/10 of a cent to somebody, or a cent to somebody feasibly. And that happens when you're charging people about 1/100th of a cent or something like that. So the Geeq layer, the validation layer, only controls those payments, person to person, machine to machine, whatever it happens to be. Above that, there's the application layer. And so that could interact with something that's actually the application. It could interact with something that's outside the application that generates the transactions. So as an example, my favorite example is this, because I have to go to Canada all the time, and then I don't have, my cell phone doesn't work. If I could walk through the airport and my cell phone could reach out with its wireless and contact your cell phone and say, hey, I'd like to buy some minutes from you. And we have an application, not a blockchain application, but an application on our cell phones that negotiated this. And we wouldn't even be aware that the negotiation was going on. So I say, great, I'd like to, we're in range, and I want to use your phone as long as you're in range of my phone by this wireless connection. Mm-hmm. And you're paid a stream of pennies on the blockchain. And your phone can say, yep, I got that penny. Yep, I got that penny. And it can be done for 1/100th of a cent apiece. And as soon as I stop paying you, you cut me off. And as soon as you're out of range, I stop paying you. So if we can let these payments go through for really small amounts of money, and our machines can do it for us, they can act as our agents. They can do things that we want them to do instead of doing things that manufacturers want them to do. And
that's a big deal. And we'll talk about the token model that you put forward as well, because that's a key draw card. It really is for your whole system. But obviously these features that you've created for optionality for people to essentially use you as a one-stop shop, that must be exciting, given that you haven't yet really tested the waters in the enterprise sector, but it's coming.
Right. So the irony is that most enterprise applications are on private blockchain. The thing that you find most commonly used, of course, is IBM Fabric. Mm-hmm. And I think the reason you find IBM Fabric being used is because it works. It doesn't do much but what it does, it does. So you can have an IBM consultant come out, he can generate what he calls a blockchain. You can have your 10 buddies write transactions to a blockchain instead of to a shared database. And then you've satisfied your blockchain initiative. And it's also very expensive. I've talked to people that have done this, and it can cost $1 million or more to actually get the system established and maintained. So it's not cheap, even though the ongoing costs don't necessarily have to be that much. But installing it and designing it, those turn out not to be cheap things. But you do it, and then it works. But it works just like a database. There's no real reason to put things on private blockchain as far as I can see. But enterprises have not been very successful, I don't believe, in actually succeeding in building applications on public blockchains. I don't know of many high-use examples. On the other hand, it is true that every enterprise is spending tons and tons of money trying to develop those. I've talked to enterprises that have 100 projects going on Ethereum, but none have really. So
they're trying to make it work on public permissionless systems, but not having a lot of success yet.
Not that I can observe, no. Okay. And so when we talk to them, they're excited. But what they say is, that's very cool. Now show it to me. Well, we haven't built it yet. So that's our big failing. We're building it, and I think we'll have it built within 9 months completely. We're building towards testnet right now. But I think it's a perfectly fair thing for them to say, put up or shut up. If I can't give you an application today, why am I even talking to you?
Well, let's talk about that, given that you're aware of some of that feedback from some of the enterprise parties that have already tinkered with Ethereum, for example, and tried to work with it. What gives you that confidence that you can go that one step beyond and actually have and get the big tick from parties that essentially want to you optimize their business through blockchain?
Well, I guess I'm not that ambitious. I don't think I can optimize their business. I think I can improve some things. There's some things where it makes sense and some things where it doesn't. So there's a lot of things that just should live on databases. And blockchain really has no role. I think that where blockchain should exist is where you don't have a trusted data intermediary. You don't have a person who's responsible for the data, who has to be liable if the data is incorrect, who has to live by it. So a bank probably should keep your account in a database. It's not really clear why I would want to put that on blockchain. There may be cases, but I mean, it's not immediate that that's the go-to thing you want to do.
Right.
It's where you don't have trust. You have parties that don't trust each other, don't know each other. The example I gave before was the IoT telemetry, where I'm trying to prevent liability or generate accountability. I was raised in California, so PG&E just started allegedly all of these wildfires. Now, if PG&E could censor the private database that it had and say, oh, we're going to take away the one that said there was a spark, well then, we can never know. And they have a corporate interest in doing that. So we don't trust them, and they have every reason not to show us that data. But if they're forced to record it in a public blockchain in advance, not knowing that that's the piece of data that's going to convict them, then I can trust either they did or they did not do the maintenance they were required. And that's where blockchain belongs.
I see. Well, considering that obviously a lot of other startups right now are really focused on that enterprise sort of arena and trying to build out, the conversation at the very least and have discussions with the corporate world. Where's your target market essentially? You were talking about you establishing a very low volatile or address the volatility problem with the inherent token model that you have. But surely in doing that, there's a reason why. And so who specifically are you trying to work with as you offer this tool suite?
So we've spoken to lots of people. We've spoken to major auto manufacturers. I don't know if I could mention all these guys. We've spoken to some very big players in fintech, in accounting, in IoT, and their reactions, with one exception, which is a funny one, are that's cool, show it to me. They want it, but we can't give it to them yet. But they're not really clear on the use cases either. They believe that blockchain is something and they should be on top of it. And if they don't capture it their competitors are going to capture it and steal the march. So they're very, very interested. But I don't think that anyone has really sold them a clear use case yet.
Right. So you have a challenge ahead of you to really not only build out, from your test net and beyond to mainnet, but you've really got a challenge of pitching a complete technology to parties that are still trying to grapple with the benefits of blockchain.
Well, yeah, and I think we will certainly do that, but that's not really our first plan. Okay. Our first plan is to develop something that you can simply use. It's like, opening a restaurant next to IBM, and you can get a hamburger here, or you can go into the canteen, and I can just go to the hamburger stand, and pretty soon you're eating at my restaurant.
Okay, so just to pull it back so that I'm really clear. So is the individual, consumer that you're really focused on, the individual users first and foremost? But even corporations, if we can generate an application that they can just use and doesn't interfere with anything they've used before, but just as an add-on that's inexpensive, doesn't take a commitment, and does something that they actually solves a pain point. So that's what we would do. We wouldn't. I would love to go in and say, okay, I'm going to tear apart your whole data system and your IT structure, and I'll build it up from zero. Pay me $1 zillion, and I'll fix it for you. But nobody wants to do that. I mean, when you're really well established, you can be McKinsey and to go do that. Right. It makes a lot of sense. So you really want to be that add-on, facility to just enhance what's already there. Okay, that's good. Now, with regard to cost savings, right across the board, that has to be, a primary sort of point of reference. So how are you going to, or are you able to already showcase to or explain to any of the parties that want to engage that they can save money by adding this feature on, by having this service that you offer?
Well, so that's the thing. I think actually that most things that blockchain can do for enterprise are things that enterprises are not doing. They're not doing anything that relates to micropayments because micropayments are simply not feasible. But if I could have as an example, Netflix has to charge me $14 a month or something to get their subscription, because if they billed me for every show, 25 cents for this show, 50 cents for that, Visa would take the majority of it. So you can't charge a la carte for content. So nobody does. But if there's a possibility of charging not only for just a piece of content, but even for 10 seconds of content for streaming it, well, now it's a whole different business model. And you may do that for some of your content that is different from other content, and pretty soon you're on Geeq. So that's the plan, to do things they've never been able to do before, because they just weren't feasible.
Right, and I'm looking forward to seeing more of this, because there's such a lack of empirical evidence right now of successful adoption of the technology in that arena. And you clearly are confident, as it's very clear in the writings, that you can do it. But with regard to some of the partnerships, I wanted to get to that as well, because clearly you've worked with certain parties. I am the ambassador for Morpheus Labs, as you may not be aware, and that involves a pay position, which is very important that people do understand. But I chose to work with them because they are doing something similar in light of the BPaaS, of a blockchain platform as a service. So you partnered with them recently. What was the nature of that partnership, and why did you do it?
So we're very excited about that too. So we want, let's just say, our strategy is to come out of the box, fighting. We want to have something people can use. We want to solve a pain point that they didn't even know they had. But at the same time, we want this to be not just us. We want this to be decentralized. We want it to be many, many people. If it's just us, it's kind of a failure. So Morpheus actually provides that opportunity. Morpheus is a platform that we can put a test net on, we can put instances of Geeq on, and we can allow developers to experiment and to find out, what works, what doesn't work, what is now actually possible when you have this level of security at this incredibly low cost. So that's, without experimentation and testing, then nobody will ever, that. So that's absolutely key to have that that opportunity. There's nothing that we would easily set up. It's pretty involved, and Morpheus has done an excellent job of it. So we're really pleased.
Right. And you mentioned platform, and in the context of BPaaS, they're well known for that. And you're also focused on that service sort of area as well, being a blockchain as service. So the collaboration potential is immense. But did you do a lot of due diligence? Did you do a lot of assessment of the quality of their startup? Because obviously in this space, there's a lot of startups that are just crypto crap. And obviously I know Payhan, the CEO, and I know the whole team very well. But did you guys do a deep analysis before you made the partnership?
So we have a division of labor. So we really have three sides of Geeq, I suppose. So my side of it is I develop the protocol and run the development team, and Stephanie runs the team that's doing marketing, community building, other relationships and so forth.
Sure.
And then Rick Asselstein does the law, which is really important. One of the things that we're really fortunate is we've got a first-class group of lawyers, Scalings, it's a major tech firm in Canada, that has forced us to be compliant in every way that we possibly can be compliant. And it's been a pain, but it's been a blessing too, because there's so many projects that have just destroyed themselves by maybe even inadvertently doing something that was not correct.
Exactly. So, and especially now when the SEC and the CFTC is really throwing down the iron hammer, it's imperative.
They scare me to death. I want to be as compliant as I can possibly be. Not interested in stealing from people or being non-compliant. But they did the due diligence, and they thought they were very impressed with the company. My due diligence was looking at what the platform offered, and that seemed to me to be something we really needed. So we had the legal, the are they a scam? Are they good? Are they honest? And we had are they good tech and so forth, and they passed with flying colors.
Okay, so moving beyond that, now that you guys have partnered, what does it mean for both of you, do you think? What, as a team collaborating together, how will it empower you as a team to lead out something by utilizing the Morpheus platform?
Well, so we're building right now an internal test net. And what this is meant to do is, so we have nodes that are deployed in Docker containers, and these communicate according to protocol. And we've got a simulated network. And what this allows us to do is do things like send bad transactions, or introduce latency, or partitions of the network, or have a certain number of nodes become dishonest. And so we can stress test this. Allows us to optimize the code, but also allows us to prove, what's going on. Well, what it doesn't do for us is build applications, and we're focusing really on the protocol layer. That's the most important thing. And as soon as we have the protocol layer, then we'll build the application layer, but it's not really our focus to start building applications. And so what they offer us is a community that already exists, so people that are interested, and I think maybe not as satisfied as they would hope to be with existing opportunities to build applications on other platforms. And
so it's really a win-win for both of you, in the sense, for both parties.
I hope so.
Yeah. So what do you think will happen in the future when we talk about platform in the context of Morpheus? They're building out the potential for significant applications that are many of them are enterprise related. Do you think that you're both going to grow from this collaboration?
I don't know. I hope so.
That's the plan, I'd imagine. So
that's the plan, I'd imagine. But you see, so I try to be an honest economist, and if an economist ever predicts the future, he's telling a lie.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
So I don't know. That is my objective. That would be, and I have every reason to believe that will be true.
But it is good to hear, though, in what you're saying, because once again we see a lot of superficial partnerships emerge in the crypto space as well. So what you're making clear is this was a deliberate, concise, and deep and meaningful partnership that you want to be lasting and at least experiment with the potential.
Yeah, no, and we simply do not have that group of developers looking at us right now because we're a young project. Morpheus Labs has that group that believes in them and is on their platform, is trying to push the space forward. Having access to that group of talented people, I think, is going to be something that is very important for us.
Absolutely. Now, November the 1st, as I understand, is an important date because the integration's official at that point. Is that still the case, that integration's finalized and there'll be more announcements to come about what it all entails?
There'll be more announcements to come. The integration's official, but I think that it will take more time than that to get an instance of the mechanism up that we're confident enough in to let other, we're going to fix the problems that we find, and then we're going to let people try to break it and fix those problems too.
Sure.
So yeah, I think it may take another month or more to get our system up there, but that's another thing I found, that anybody that tells you that they're going to hit a particular development target, you shouldn't believe them. It's
right.
It always take more.
Well, one of the things that was interesting, John, in the comments I read, I made some notes when I was reading about the collaboration between both of you, and there were some claims that are from your team that say that Morpheus Labs has an extremely talented developer pool. So I was wondering how that, how you made that assessment, what did you find, or what did the team find when they were assessing that aspect of their...
You're asking the wrong person. So we have this division of labor, like I said, and Stephanie's group is the community building group. And so
I'll definitely be looking forward to talking to her, because one of the references made, and I even quoted Stephanie, was that they do plan on collaborating those parties to build out things like meetups and hackathons. So do you see that more likely to happen, more of those kind of public collaborations? Yeah,
we've already had some airdrops, and we've had AMAs and hackathons. I think that's a little further down the road, but certainly once we're up with a platform that I think I'm comfortable, that gives people the security that I promised them, then that's a thing that we would like to do. But a man should know his limitations, and that's not a space that I know very much about. I don't know really the space of what the community might look like, or how to engage a community. I'm a geek. I'm a mathematician. I like to solve problems, and so I kind of stick to what I'm good at, and fortunately I have people around me that are good at the things that I'm not good at.
A geek leading geek, and that's totally apt, I think, in this in the role that you play. But Stephanie, so she said something really apt, I think, as well. She mentioned that Morpheus Labs has an impressive and comprehensive vision to accelerate blockchain adoption around the world. So clearly, despite that things are still experimental for you, you are trying to work with startups that also share similar visions. Both of you really want to build out something that is meaningful. Pei Han, the CEO, also said things like about you. He was impressed by the confidence of the Geeq team, and that you're really taking at the protocol level, you're taking things seriously. So from both sides, it seems that despite the noise of crypto, you're both focused very much on blockchain and what it can do.
Right. And I think, again, this is go-to thing for an economist, right? Division of labor. I don't trust anybody, in a professional sense. So I think if something can be hacked, it should be hacked because it will be hacked. If it's breakable, it should be broken. So that's where my head is at. My head is at trying to make a system that can't be broken, because people at the edge can protect themselves from bad actors. So that's my job. Pei Han has this vision that I completely agree with, and Stephanie agrees with as well. But it's definitely something that he has built, and something that is really impressive, but something which I would be totally incapable of doing. So,
well, it's great that you're capitalizing on the work of others to enhance your own. And I think it's a smart move in business, actually, to align with people of similar caliber. We've seen that play out in history, actually, and that's where success does come, with aligning yourself with people of quality. Now, moving back to you for a moment with regard to your tech, I wanted to ask, at what point do you plan on, or if you indeed do plan to, open up some of your code, enable a more transparent repo and GitHub with participants that can really engage and make the I guess put more forward on the repo?
Yeah, no, so that's actually a good question. If I was going to give you so the answer is probably we're going to start posting our code in about a month. I think that's sort of our roadmap at this point. It's absolutely essential that any code for any public blockchain, the source code can be seen. If the source code can't be seen, then it simply can't be trusted. So the code must be open source. It's not, on the other hand, it's not a free code. It's code that has some proprietary elements in it and so the idea, and so we're not, I mean, of course we would welcome people that wanted to participate, but, and I'm a big Linux fan, by the way, so I believe in open source projects as well. But I'm also an economist, and the problem with open source projects is that people have varying degrees of attachment to them, and it's very hard to organize people. If you've got enough scale like Linux, maybe so, but if you're a relatively small project and somebody comes and goes, it makes things slow, the code is uneven. So I think it really has to be written in a central way, but then open so that people can see.
I see.
So we will be open with our code and show people and let them audit it and let them see if they think that we're doing what we say that we're doing. And we certainly want people want to join, we'd be more than thrilled. On the application side, though, we're open to anything. So the core code, that's what we're going to be writing. The application code, it's a Wild West.
Right, so things are coming. We'll see more of this, the unfolding and unfurling of much of your code in the future as you're willing to release it. With regard to the use cases, I did want to touch on specifics of those because you did mention micropayments, but then there's clear things like remittances, tokenization, and escrow as well. Can you just give us a bit more confidence that you're really building forward towards viable use case in those areas?
Right. Well, so it's funny. So I'm teaching a course in information communication technology economics. I wrote a textbook, which I give away. And I just had to rewrite the blockchain chapter because I'm just sort of approaching that in my lectures. And I wrote it, I guess, a year ago, and I had to totally rewrite it because everything has changed. But I was sitting down, I was trying to write an example that was accessible of a smart contract. I should just be able to throw out an example. Here's a smart contract.
Right.
And what I realized actually is that all the use cases that I'm really excited about are very close to the metal. They're not really elaborate dApps. They're using blockchain in the way that blockchain is unique. So it's writing records that should be immutable, that can be trusted, that don't require a data intermediary. And so these applications, micropayments, IoT, chain of custody, distributed systems, what they're really doing is just recording bits of data in this unalterable and ordinal way. And so any well-designed blockchain can do that. The question is, can it do it securely and cheaply and scalably? And that's what we're trying to do.
Well, it's certainly a major challenge, and there's a lot involved. One of the things I found very interesting in your literature was that you did a strong comparative analysis with other startups using their consensus mechanisms to explain the value that you propose. So you talk about the points of value that you offer, things like edge security, civil proof. These are all the variables obviously you're using to measure nation-state proof, anonymity, trustlessness, and the wealth proof. Now, what was fascinating is that you went through not just proof of work, you went and proof of stake, but you went and assessed DAGs, private DAGs, and even the POA. So are you confident on all that assessment, essentially, that you're moving in the right direction with proof of honesty, and that you are, basically enabling a better solution?
Yes, I am. So really all blockchain is in some sense a DAG. It's backwards looking hashes, which is really just what a directed acyclic graph is. So it's a special form in a ledger, but really we're all working with some form of DAG. So proof of work, proof of stake, proof of authority, they're all fundamentally based, well, I'm sorry, that's not true. Proof of authority, proof of stake are all fundamentally based in this practical Byzantine fault tolerance limit, which means that you can never get away from 33% Byzantine fault tolerance. And it's always the case if somebody buys the majority of the stake or acquires it or gets it delegated or whatever, then they control the system. And that's just built in. There's no way you can ever avoid that. And so you're only as secure as how much people are willing to stake for the privilege of securing and storing and distributing your blockchain, which by the way is weird. So you have to pay them. So that limits the security in a very strong way. And if you have a really aggressive nation state, it doesn't matter how much it costs. So you can never really be a nation state proof. Proof of work is just based upon computational resources. Nation states have tons of computational resources. So do botnets. So there's just a fundamental limitation. You're just hoping that nobody bothers to move enough computational power to subvert the network. That's a hope.
And John, in the context of actual startups, when we name things like Ethereum, Bitcoin, Algorand, Constellations, there's several other DAG networks, Hashgraph as well with the private DAG, Ripple. When we talk about all of those, do you see flaws more than with many of them, or what's your take on that, given you're literally saying that we need to fix some of the challenges that we've seen in the past?
Well, right. So like they fall into these categories. So proof of authority, it's a majority vote or a 2/3 vote. DAGs, you're stuck with DAGs because DAGs depend upon the number of recursive hashes to transactions that you believe are correct. And that depends upon a certain degree of stochastic, of random choosing of places to attach your transaction. And that really just, all that drives that is how many transactions do I choose to hash into the graph? Well, I could have a lot of computational power and hash a lot of things into the graph and then hash them a different way. So it's possible to subvert the graph by moving it back and forth, and we can never actually get finality. It's sort of built into the technology that you're stuck with. If you've got less than a majority dishonest, there's just nothing you can do to fix it. Right. So our answer is we just have to break away from that Byzantine fault tolerance constraint and let users who have an incentive not to get your tokens stolen. Nodes would like to steal your tokens, but if I can give you the power to protect yourself, well, then I know you're going to look after yourself, and that's the basic security model. And
the big question now, will be, can you achieve that in the sort of tested environment with testnet and mainnet and beyond? That's going to be really exciting. But right now, it's great to hear that you have that basis once again, that foundation of technology to really, test the waters. The team needs to be solid to do that. I made some notes just of some of the members. You mentioned Rick, then there's Stephanie, obviously, as the CDO, the chief architect, with Lung Yuan, and the list goes on. You have different people for different jobs. Do you have the right team? Do you have enough in your team to make this work?
So we have a strong team. Rick's team in Toronto is amazing. I mean, this Gowlings is about one of, I don't know if it's the top. I think it's the top. Anyway, it's close enough to the top tech firm that it doesn't really matter. And they have done really good work for us. We have a CTO. Rick's very well connected with a CFO. I'm sorry. Rick is connected with Deloitte from way back, and has friends that have helped us. That's Chris McClanahan, who's our CFO. We also have Eric Ball as our treasurer, and he was the treasurer of Oracle for about 10 years and handled about $60 billion worth of Larry Ellison's money. That's going to be very important for us because one of the challenges in blockchain is trying to make connections with the real banking sector. And the banking sector is a little bit chary of blockchain for probably good reasons, but he knows people, he has the connections, he has the credibility, and that's going to be very important as we start to really deploy. On the dev side, Lun was the second engineer hired by Intuit when they were just starting up. He tells me he's been in 8 startups, of which 2 have been successful. So he's got a lot of experience on that. Yeah, and he's been doing just terrific work. Ian Smith is, I kind of love Ian. He's our chief developer. if there's anyone more suspicious than me, it's him. He's looked deeply into the various, actually just the nuts and bolts about how Ethereum code is updated.
I would love to talk to him later if that's possible, because I like people like that.
Yeah. So these are not protocol level security holes. These are implementation level security holes that are really frightening when you think about them. It's not just Ethereum. It's the whole ecosystem. When we were at this MIT conference, somebody gave a talk that was titled "Everything is Broken," and they just went down the list of all the ways that Bitcoin almost was attacked disastrously, but at the last minute, somebody was awake, saw that this was a hole that had to be patched, and did it, and mostly no harm done. But that's kind of scary. That's too close to the edge for me. And
I can understand, because there is a strong sense of fragility. Even those in the crypto sort of environment are aware of this sort of eggshell scenario that people are walking on. So, once again, we're trying to smooth those surfaces, trying to make things more, to strengthen the foundation so that we can trust the trustless environment.
That's what we're trying to do. Yeah. So fortunately he's much deeper in the technology than I am. And he's deeper into the computer science, into the networks. I know a lot about it, but he knows a lot more. So
well, clearly you have a very strong team. I did want to check that, and you've made a very strong case there. One of the things that your team did state is that blockchain is coming, in terms of the future, and there's no question of that. Word names like Amazon, JP, IBM, Deloitte, the World Bank, they were named quite literally. So really, when you have this kind of vetting process, and you have the imperative questions that some of your team have, you also have this push, for trying to engage and take part in what is, this idea that blockchain really is coming. So it's either jump in or miss the boat. Yeah,
I mean, that sounds like FOMO, doesn't it?
Does it? Because if your team believe blockchain is coming, don't you want to be part of that?
So it's just astonishing to me to look at the numbers that you get given. I think it was 46%. I forget the number exactly. Something on that scale of top Fortune 500 companies. I think it was top 1,000. Their CEOs said they were going to make a major investment in blockchain this year. That's enormous. I don't know what they're going to do, but everybody thinks they're going to do it. So either it's going to completely fizzle, which I can't imagine because the technology is good, or it's going to come. I think we just haven't figured out how it's going to come yet. I hope it's us. But.
So it's still early days, and obviously, with every startup that I talk to that has really good tech, we want that to happen for you quite sincerely, because it's all about trying to build a quality ecosystem for the future. Now, tough question: the token.
Yeah.
Very fascinating design that you have with Geeq as the token itself. You argue that it's going to be less volatile than the things we've seen in the past. And interestingly, you call it a stabilised token. Can you talk us about the imperative of having something that doesn't fluctuate as much as things like BTC and Ethereum?
Sure. So Ethereum, BTC, and most tokens that are just free floating, they have the value that people think they have. And I actually like Bitcoin. I think it has value. It provides an anonymous way to transfer value, at least pretty anonymous. It doesn't have so much value on it that it's a real temptation to attack. So I think it really does provide the services that it's supposed to provide. So it's awesome. It's beautiful. It does just what it does. Costs a lot of electricity. That's unfortunate, but it does what it's supposed to do. So it's terrific. But fundamentally, the value is whatever people say it is. There's no intrinsic value. Attempts to go the other way at a stable token, Tether and so forth, the only way to do that is with a fully backed token. And you can never really tell if a token is fully backed. In fact, Tether, I don't think, even claims to be fully backed. And so there's a degree of trust. We trust the bank with our deposits. Really, the electronic numbers that we get on our computer screen that say how much money we have in our account, that's really a stable token. We believe we can take those numbers and exchange them for dollars. And we don't really worry about the integrity of the bank if the FDIC stands behind it, and they will print you dollars if they have to. So we know that those account balances are stable with respect to dollar bills, because well,
it's certainly a representation of fiat, and as you'd appreciate, that's unbacked it doesn't. There's nothing backing that at all.
Ultimately, it's just whatever we say it is.
Right.
Right. So all of that is, but so we take an intermediate path, middle path. That's what we like. So the idea of a stabilized token is we don't believe. So if you have there's technical problems with stable tokens, which we don't have to go into now. If you're going to do it, it's got to be fully backed. Mm-hmm. A floating token is no good because we can see that there are any number of tokens that just have vast fluctuations. The price drops. Even excellent technological projects, if we find that their price starts dropping, it becomes a self-reinforcing disaster, and then the technology gets forgotten because the token is worth nothing, and mm-hmm. that sort of spreads its bad reputation. So what do? We have the stabilized token. We start with whatever value the token has, and then as the token were to increase in value, we issue a certain number of new tokens and place part of the proceeds into what we call a fiat stabilization account. Mm-hmm. And there's some algorithmic stuff that goes behind that. So the token goes up, we accumulate fiat that we're going to use to repurchase if the token starts to drop in value. So as the token starts to drop in value, we start to buy back the tokens that were issued. We reduce the coin base, and we also reduce the fiat reserve. Mm-hmm. And so what this does is provide a kind of shock absorber. It doesn't stop it from going up. It doesn't stop it from going down. But a lot of the reasons you find a lot of this fluctuation is because there's a lot of very low information price variation driven by speculators. Mm-hmm. So if a speculator can dump a whole bunch, it may be that there's not really much demand between a price of, let's say, $5 and $3. It might be that no one is really sitting out there ready to buy the token because the market is thin. So right. A little bit of selling and you get this catastrophic drop.
And also, John, there's the issue of crypto exchanges existing, that presents its own challenge because, as you mentioned before, quite rightly, is that essentially people decide. We decide, what value these assets have. And now, in the context of you emerging in the future with this token, what are your thoughts on exchanges? Are you planning on being listed or engaging in some way with these crypto exchanges? Many of them obviously don't even interact; they just list you anyway. But what's your view?
Well, okay, I can talk generally, but my vicious Canadian lawyers say that I can't say anything about exchanges.
Yeah, you certainly can't talk about token price and that sort of thing. But I mean more so in the context of what you've seen in the past. Let's talk about that. We've seen the way in which crypto exchanges have been a vehicle for speculation. So does it concern you that despite your efforts to try and create a low volatile asset, digital asset of the future, that are you concerned that people can still speculate? They can still, get together and try and, create narratives of value. I mean, how are you going to deal with that?
Well, that's right. So like I say, I trust nobody. I assume that everybody's going to try to do what's best for them and not what's good for me or anybody else. So what this token, this monetary policy does is it makes it expensive to do that. So if you're trying to drive down the token, well, then you've got to actually there's purchases of the token all throughout. At every point, as you're trying to drive the price down, token is being repurchased, and so people are not really as worried about a panicky drop because we know that they can get out. There's not going to be. You don't have to wait till it's dropped 90% before there's a floor. Right.
And that's really interesting because basically you remove a lot of the noise of speculation because of the low volatility, because it's no longer sexy to those who want to, play around with the short-term trade of the day. Because obviously, so is the idea that it becomes more user-driven by those who genuinely want to use this to interact in a meaningful way where the token has value according to, its use case.
So you can't achieve that. That's the design goal, but it can't be achieved. There's still speculators, and they still, if a speculator is determined enough, if he puts his money where his mouth is, so he's willing to buy or is willing to sell, then he can drive something on the price. So there's no doubt about that. Right. What we can do is make that much less worthwhile and make it costly to do that. And if you do that, you increase the influence of the actual utility on the blockchain. In our case, our token is a utility token because its use, and this actually is something that's innovative in Geeq as far as I'm aware. We pay our validators for each and every single little thing they do. So if they validate a transaction, if they write a block, they're paid that block some very tiny amount for that fact. So everybody's incentivized at the micro level to do things. It's not just the block proposer. It's not just, you're paid at the end of the epoch. You're paid every time you do something. And so the utility, the token is continuously being fed to the validators, if nobody else. Even if nobody wants to use micropayments, it has to drive the validation layer. There are two extremes. There are free-floating tokens that just have the value that we think they have. And there's no fundamental reason Bitcoin should be worth what it's worth, but it's what it's worth. It's all based upon expectations of the future and information and so on. I think Bitcoin is worth something. I think it provides an important service. It provides a way to anonymously transfer value between people that don't know each other. It does it better than almost any other token that exists currently. So I think actually it should have value. It's not just fiction. It does something useful. But generally, it could be worth anything, just like the dollar is a fiat currency that could be worth anything. Stabilized tokens are very problematic for a number of technical reasons, economic reasons, but I'll leave that aside for now. I'm happy to talk about it. Our objective is to hit a nice middle path. So what we're trying to do is this. We say, let's just take the starting point of the issue of the token as worth, I don't know, let's just pick a number, say it's worth $1. Don't know what it's worth. Let's just imagine. So if the token happens to appreciate in value, then what we will do is issue additional tokens, and we'll take some of a portion of the fiat that is obtained from selling those new tokens and put it into a fiat reserve account. So there's a programmed algorithmic
preemptive monetary policy, like you literally know right down.
It's known. Everybody can anticipate it. It's not a surprise. It's automatic. So you know that as the token increases, the token base is going to increase in quantity. So if there's more demand for the token, there's more token. If the price starts to fall, there's an algorithmic use of this fiat reserve that we've established to repurchase the token, and the monetary base shrinks. So this doesn't stop it from going up in value, doesn't stop it from going down in value. But what it does do is it creates known supply and demand at every single price point. So you cannot drive the token value down for free. You can't dump, let's say we'll dump 1,000 Geeq, and everybody says, oh my goodness, it's going to crash, and nobody wants to buy Geeq until it gets down to a penny. Well, if you're selling 1,000 Geeq, we're going to buy 1,000 Geeq because it's programmed into the monetary policy to buy it. And now we've only dropped 10 cents. You want to push us back more? Well, you got to sell more.
Right.
So it makes it expensive to do it. So speculators still have power, but it shifts the power in the direction of the use of the token.
And it's fascinating because, as you mentioned before, going back to BTC, many proponents of that, that coin and that ecosystem really argue that it has its own store of value. As you mentioned, it's built on the value of its own tech. Now, if we consider your situation for a moment, in context to the current scenario we see play out now with global money, many would argue, why do it? Why have this unit of account, have this utility token, when you could essentially just use a stablecoin, or you could just use fiat?
Well, because you can't. So in terms of a global currency, well, you can use fiat for sure, but then there's a privacy cost of using fiat. Unless you use literal cash, every transaction you have is recorded by Visa, MasterCard, or automatic clearinghouse with the bank. So if everything is known, and if a central authority wants to stop your funds, then that's it, you're out of luck. So that's damaging to freedom, and it's damaging to financial privacy. I don't think anybody should really know that I bought a bottle of scotch, or that I bought a new set of tires. Whose business is that? But if I use a credit card, it's out there permanently, and it's data mined, it's analyzed, so I don't think that that's a way that I want to have the future evolve if I can prevent it.
Sure.
Now, I don't have, it would be great if Geeq was that kind of global currency, but that's not really why we're doing this. I mean, that's wonderful. Mm-hmm. But why we're really doing this is we're creating a utility token. And what's unique, I think, I may be wrong that it's unique, but if it's not unique, it's very rare. Our token actually pays the validators for every single thing they do. So we pay them piecemeal. If the validators on a particular chain validate a transaction, create a block, run virtual machine services for a smart contract, they get a payment that is actually twice what their resources utilized in that, or maybe more. Mm-hmm. So they're paid directly and they're incentivized directly for every single thing they do. And that's different from other blockchains where you're the block proposer or the person that finds the knots on Bitcoin or the people that are staked in proof of stake. Those are the only people that get paid. Our model is that everybody gets paid every time everybody does everything. So
that's a cool model. So every contributor to the ecosystem is rewarded via the utility token. I think that's a game changer because, as you mentioned, there's only certain parties with the previous models we've seen. And that's been raised time and time again, especially in the light of developers and the kind of work they put into many of these ecosystems.
Yeah, so that's the payment model, that's the incentive model for nodes, but that means that we've got to have a token that can pay people tenths of a cent, hundredths of a cent, and you cannot move fiat at that level. And stable token is just another kind of fiat, really, because you got to pay the fees to whoever generates it. You've got to pay for the exchange. Creating, again, it's complicated why you can't do fiat. There's some deep economic, you can't do it. It's
almost ad hoc digital fiat in some ways because it's so directly linked to it. And I understand what you're saying. And one of the things I really want to talk to you is underpinning the monetary policy that you've established and this exciting move towards less volatile, use-based or use-centric system and token. You need a really clear tokenomics, a really clear token model. How transparent are you about that? Because I had a look online. I didn't get all the information from it. I'm just wondering, have you outlined all the details with regard to the clarity of how much you're raising, what's the full amount of your supply, those sorts of things.
So let's see. There's two parts of the tokenomics. There's what I would call the monetary policy. This is completely transparent, and that's the point of it. It's to give people full information, and on the basis of that information, make the token less volatile. If it was obscure, it wouldn't serve its purpose. So that's completely disclosed and algorithmic. The other part of the tokenomics is how many tokens are there, what is their price, when is they're issued, who owns them, and so forth. And so, so here I'm going to be quiet because we do. I think I know what they are, but I think that this is one of those things that my lawyers don't want me to.
But it's good to know that you do know, because what I'm hearing is that if you do know now, eventually the public will know, because it's
very soon. Actually, I think this information we're working out a few final details. Is actually how it is. We have almost all of it, but then there's a couple of elements that we're negotiating about. So
I think maybe we could have a talk then, though, John, when they're finalized, just talking on the tokenomic, because I did really want to know more about that. I also wanted to talk about the raise that you're currently doing now, potentially, in the sense of raising funds to build out your startup, to build out your business. I noticed that there's a suggestion of a private sale, hard cap of 15 million, soft cap of 2. Not a lot, again, is disclosed online about that, but can you just tell us, what is the plan? How are you going to get funds to keep building this and keep innovating?
So the way we've gotten to where we are so far is partly we've bootstrapped. So there have been a lot of people who have put in time for free, rewarded with some quantity of tokens that may be worth nothing if the project fails. Mm-hmm. We've had equity sales, small equity sales that have allowed us to pay lawyers and developers and things that we have to pay cash for. And we've had some token sales as well that have done the same thing. So we've employed all of those strategies getting to the point that we are now.
Okay.
And what we're doing going forward is we're also now having, I guess I can say this, we're in the final stages of locking down another equity raise on a Canadian platform. And
right.
I think I don't.
So you're working more towards securing more funds for the future. And then in light of the more crypto side of things, for those of us, who want to engage in that side of the token as a utility token, what's the plan there? Are you planning on doing some sort of raise?
Yes. So we'll have private token sales. We're probably about to launch these in the next few weeks.
So stay tuned.
We're having a quiet phase, talking to people at this moment, and so it'll be a private token sale, and then I'm not allowed to say what happens next.
I can understand that, but I want to ask you something tough. Obviously, because I've been in this space for some time, and have invested in a few projects, not a lot, but in the time that I have, I've always questioned whether or not lockups are legitimate or not, because obviously at the end of the day, the team can decide to change those. If they get consensus among the stakeholders themselves. So are you thinking along the lines of a long-term lockup to make sure that those parties that invest can't just turn around, at the moment when it's live on exchanges and just simply dump them like we've seen with other projects, the way it's played out? Well,
so I'm of two different minds on that.
Right.
So from... If I were just to ignore what the market demanded and what I thought was the right kind of economics, I guess what I would do is I would not have lockups. I would perhaps lock tokens until the mainnet was launched, but then let the tokens out and run the monetary policy, get it stable. That would be my preference. I think and
let the token be as intended.
And that's what I think is the right thing to do. But I want to build the project. And so if the market tells me that I have to do something different, that founder tokens have to be locked for a certain amount, or contributor tokens, or tokens that are sold in private sale locked longer than those that are sold in other ways, well, okay, then that's the reality of the market.
Right. The nature of the beast as it stands.
I don't think those are terribly, terribly harmful either. I think it's not optimal, but it's okay to do those things.
Sure. And obviously in time, what tends to happen anyway is that once we start to see use be the primary driver of the value of the ecosystem, many of those who were just there for speculation, they put that the tokens back in circulation for the purpose of use. So in time, things should become more overt that use is the primary asset here, and the token drives the use. In terms of partnerships, can you tell us anything? I'm assuming that there's a lot of NDAs, but are there things coming that are essentially set up for partnerships?
Partnerships. So let's see.
Is there a pipeline, essentially, of partners looking to work with you? I mean, what can you tell us in that area without trying to FOMO? But give us more of a direction of the legitimacy and the interest from more of a macro level, where we would understand and we could sort of process this with the knowledge we have of real business.
Right. So here's how I see it playing out. So I think I mentioned earlier, I've been in a lot of rooms with a lot of pretty high-end IT people in big companies, and they desperately want blockchain for reasons they don't fully understand for the most part. They like what I tell them. I think it may just because I'm so incredibly charming. I'm not sure that people are really equipped to evaluate well what a good project is or not. I don't want to sound arrogant in that. It's extremely complicated. You've got to get the computer science right. You got to get cryptography. There's systems and network issues. There's game theory. There's the macroeconomics. There's the use case. There's just a lot of things that all have to be right. And if any is broken, then the system is not useful. So it's a hard ask to get people to make a right decision. But what I tell them, they say, that's great. I love that. Now can I build on it? And I say, I'll get back to you when we have the project built and you can build on it.
Well,
so we don't have partnerships inked, but we have people that are wanting us to come back as soon as we have something to offer them.
And that's pretty natural in considering the period of time in your roadmap where you are now. And having talked to many CEOs and many other startups as well, it's you're pretty typically positioned right now, it seems. Now, I did want to ask you with regard to revenue. Is there a plan that you've all worked out in terms of sustaining your model beyond the token itself, so that there are other fuels or other means to create revenue to once again grow your team?
So there are we actually have a business plan. So the fundamental way that the fundamental revenue model is this: that I mentioned that our token is used as a utility token to pay validators.
Right.
They receive payment for everything they do, and we're also there, and we receive part of that transactions fee, very low transactions fee, 1/100 of a cent or less. We get a portion of that on every transaction that is done, and that's what we retain. That means that unless we have really huge volume, we don't get anything. So we're incentivized to make sure this is adopted, or else there's nothing in it for us. So I think that aligns our incentive. So that's the major source of what we think the company's revenue would be. And of course, that means that if we get those revenues, what do we want to do with them? We want to drive that back into the company so that we can get even more volume and more revenues. So we've tried to set up even the incentives within the company so that the company does what is in the interest of the users of the platform. Okay,
well, that'll be good to see that unfold as time goes on. Now, to get to that stage, one of the most important things that's often overlooked by highly technological teams, very academic teams, is the imperative of PR and marketing, despite, that many don't, to the bane of the teams, they don't like it. Have you started to look in that direction, or has your team, has Stephanie and obviously your crypto representative as well, to make sure that you are aligning with the approach of many that are successful in getting a voice and garnering a network of people in the community?
Yeah, I think so. And I think we're really blessed in that respect. This is just not my space. I just don't know what to do. I'm completely at sea. So I'm happy that we have people that are not at sea that know what to do this. We've actually got a team of, I think it's now 6 people who are working between half-time and full-time and working for tokens. So they have enough confidence in the project that they're willing to put in 20 to 40 hours a week purely for the token. And so that
because they believe in your project.
Because they believe in the project, and they're doing things. Yeah. So I mean, that actually is very reassuring to me because they're far more expert in what the market wants in this space than I am. I can build technology, at least I can design technology. I have to have somebody else to build it because I'm not a programmer, but I can design the technology. I don't know what the market really wants or how to get to the market, but they do. There are people there that do their advertising, their branding, their community building, their developing partnerships. All of those things that I'm totally incompetent about, we have people working on it with the expectation that the platform is going to succeed. Well,
it's great to see that they have that faith in the value of the token enough to utilize it in the way intended, because not every party, in the PR sector or in the marketing sector is like that. I can say, for absolute certainty, some of them do prefer fiat or they prefer Bitcoin and Ethereum, but to actually have representatives in your PR team that are willing to work for the token.
Every single one of them.
It's a really great standard, and I hope that is a bit of an example for the future for many others. I wanted to finish off with a statement that I found on the website. It says that Geeq is scalable, inexpensive, computationally light, and it's designed to create a robust, secure blockchain network.
You can catch anybody in the system if they're not being honest. You don't have to trust us. You can verify it. So I guess I would say that whole part is correct, but you don't have to trust us because you know that we're honest because you can check yourself. That doesn't really parse very well as a slogan, but that's the idea.
It makes a lot of sense. It's all about trustlessness. It's about verification. It's about
right.
provability. And most importantly, you have the proof of honesty that's going to drive this and change the game when it comes to really enabling and enlivening this whole network that you're building. I wish you all the very best. Thank you for explaining the very detailed plan that you do have. Thank you for also letting us know more about the partnership with Morpheus as well. That's been very interesting to note. And once again, thank you for professionalism and for just allowing us insight into what you're just starting to really showcase. And hopefully next time we catch up, there'll be more empirical proof, more discussions on what you actually can tell us that is being done rather than just at that theory level.
Yep. Okay, well, thank you so much. Your questions are really interesting. I'm really happy to answer them.